Well, we are beginning today a new series that I've titled Magnificence Among Us. It is a look at the Gospel of John. And coming out of Romans 12, we did that memorization project. I challenged you to memorize Romans 12, the whole chapter, and a lot of you stepped up and did that, which is great. And you ended up really enjoying it. And I've had multiple people come to me in the last couple of weeks and said, are we going to do something again? Are you going to give us another assignment to memorize? And so if a student's asking for an assignment, never disappoint them, okay? So what I'd like you to do, it's in the bulletin, it's on a half sheet in there. If you would like to work on another memorization project, I would like to challenge you to memorize John chapter 1, the first 18 verses. We're going to be talking about those verses today, but it is just a beautiful passage of Scripture, and I think it's one you will enjoy having in your heart if you don't already. So if you want something to work on memorization, John 1 through 18, no, I'm probably not making that many pens this time around. All right. I've been on a bit of an Antarctic kick lately. And I think you remember a number of weeks back, I talked about the heroics of Ernest Shackleton. And you may remember Shackleton attempted to make this trip to the South Pole. Their ship became stranded. Amazingly, after over a year being stranded, lost out there on the ice, his entire crew was saved, largely because of Shackleton's great leadership. Years later, Henry Worsley, another Brit, attempted to make the same trek, but unfortunately perished in the attempt. It had been, I believe, his great uncle who had been the navigator on Shackleton's expedition. Well, just after Christmas, there were two guys who both attempted to make this Antarctic crossing. Lou Rudd, who was actually a friend of Henry Worsley's, and then Colin O'Brady, a guy from the United States. And they both started on November 3rd, same day, and we're attempting to make this over 900-mile traverse solo across the Antarctic. As it was, the American Colin O'Brady actually won. He made it on December 26th. Lewis Rudd made it on December 28th. So quite an accomplishment for both of these gentlemen. A number of years ago, I think this kind of polar expedition has always intrigued me. I would never want to do it, but the kind of people that are motivated to undertake these amazing solo treks under such harsh conditions, they're always intriguing to me. And a lady I got to hear speak, she actually came to swim here and told about her expedition, was a woman named Helen Thayer. Helen was the first woman to solo trek to the magnetic North Pole. She did that back in 1988, and she did it when she had turned 50. So late in life, she was doing this kind of trek. What I found interesting is here, as Helen talked about her adventure, and it is an adventure indeed. If you ever get a chance to read the book, it's called Polar Dream. She encountered numerous polar bears, which when you're by yourself out there is a pretty terrifying thing. But they're pulling all of their own gear. So these trekkers are pulling sleds that weigh hundreds of pounds with all their food, their clothing, and so of course, you want to take just the essentials. We asked her during that interview if she took anything along to read. And she said the one book she took to read was the Gospel of John. Because she said when you're in a place that is so cold and so barren, she needed something warm to be with her. And the Gospel of John was what she took. John's Gospel is a unique account of Jesus' life. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and Matthew, Mark, and Luke are what we call the synoptics. If you were to take the word synonym, words that have very similar meanings, and the word optics, how things look, synoptics is the idea that those three Gospels look very similar. They recount the same miracles of Jesus, they recount them in the same sequence, they're very parallel accounts. There is not much commentary. It's a pretty straightforward recounting of Jesus' ministry. Matthew chapter 1 begins, the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And he continues with a genealogy before he gets into the actual story of Jesus. Mark, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, as it is written in Isaiah the prophet. And he refers to a prophecy and then moves directly into his narrative of Jesus' life. And then Luke, it seemed good to me also, having followed all things closely for some time past, to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, that you may have certainty concerning the things you have been taught. And so Luke, writing to a particular individual who apparently had commissioned this, gives a very detailed, the most detailed account of the life of Christ. But John is different. And John, you see that from the very outset. He wants us to know that he is writing about no ordinary man, that Jesus is in fact far, far more. And here's how it begins in John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Jumping down to verse 9. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, and yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of the blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. For from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. The only God who is at the Father's side, he has made him known. A totally different kind of introduction to this gospel. It is poetic, it is lyrical, it is beautiful, it is rich. John himself is a unique author among the ones who penned a gospel. John chapter 19, we pick some of this up in some of Jesus' final words from the cross. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved. Now this is interesting. This is always the designation that John gives to himself in the Gospel of John, simply as the disciple whom Jesus loved. So there was some unique relationship that John and Jesus shared. We know that Jesus ministered to the multitudes, but within the multitudes there was a large group of disciples. But within the large group of disciples there were the 12. Among the 12 there were the three, Peter, James, and John. And among the three, John seemed to have been an especially close friend of Jesus. And so Jesus, at the last moments of his earthly life, sees his mother, sees John standing there at the foot of the cross, and he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." And he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her to his own home. So it was John himself that Jesus gave the responsibility to look after Mary after his death. John was the last disciple to die. He was the last one to write his account of Jesus' life. He would have been familiar with the writings of Matthew and Mark and Luke. But John's gospel flows out of a lifetime of reflection on the life and the impact of Jesus. Someone that he had known as a friend, as his master, as the risen Lord. You know, I think that John would have been a great photographer. While I've been looking at these pictures up here, I have to say thanks to Ross Hamilton and Dick Hancock and Dale Arvison. They were kind to loan me a bunch of their photos for this morning. You know, photographers work hard and take a lot of time to create what they create. In fact, I can tell you if you want to do something really boring sometime, if you're not a photographer, is to go hiking with a photographer. It takes them forever. I intentionally leave my camera home sometimes when Brenda and I go for a walk because it is so boring to hike with a photographer. And this up here represents a lot of time that these guys have spent developing their craft and capturing beauty. You know, we've got this beautiful owl, this big bird over here. That's one that Dick took. Ross has got his beautiful nature pictures here, you know, trees and waterfalls. And Dale has got some of these wildlife pictures, this road that goes off into the woods with the lines along the side, and they've given a lot of time to creating something that is captivating. But I want you to know it doesn't really have to take that long. In fact, just this week, having looked at these, feeling a little inspired, I took a drive about 5 minutes away from the church, just pulled out my phone, and I took a picture too. And this picture really has everything that these pictures have. If you look up here at the top, that's an eagle. I would say that eagle is a bigger bird than that owl, so far superior. We also have, you can see there are trees, there is water, everything that Ross has got, and I've even included a road with cool curvy lines in it. So it's not really that hard to compose a great picture. You just have to get your phone out. I will have prints available after the service if you'd like to purchase these. What makes the difference? What makes the difference between that picture and these pictures? Well, it's all about framing, isn't it? It's about composition. I had a photographer tell me one time that photography is as much about what you leave out of the picture as what you include, because it focuses your attention on what the artist wants you to see. And this is what we see happen in John's gospel. John himself skips over a lot of the biography of Jesus. There's all kinds of details that John does not give us. In fact, one commentator notes that John builds his whole story around just 7 miracles of Jesus. You can find places in the other gospels where they recount 7 miracles in one chapter. John, 7 miracles in the entire gospel. In fact, John himself acknowledges that he has really limited what he's recounting of Jesus' life. John chapter 20, verse 30 and 31. John says, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. So John skipped over a lot. I'm going to skip over some stuff as well. A lot has been written about the book of John. Here is a stack of commentaries. There you go. That's the Gospel of John. Check this one out. That's just for the Gospel of John. How come? Well, so much is written about John because when you get into it, you realize that John wrote a very rich and multi-layered book. We're going to try to go over 1 chapter per week, which means we are not going to cover everything in the Gospel of John, okay? We're going to focus our lens on some particular scenes within each of those chapters. And I hope as we do this that you will spend some time yourself reading more fully and more deeply in John's Gospel. Framing is all part of something that is a bigger topic, and that is composition. It's not just what you choose to put in the photo, it's how you choose to look at it. It's how you light it. It's the angle that you take it from. And when you read John's gospel, you realize that this is a very carefully composed account of Jesus' life. And often there is more going on than you see at first glance. John pulls some things together. He focuses the lens in a way to help you see some deeper truths. And sometimes I think when we talk about a writer like John editing his account, it makes people a little bit uncomfortable. It's like, well, do you mean he made stuff up? I mean, he just kind of pulled stuff out of thin air? What are you saying, that he edited his account? Let me show you something from a vacation Burnett and I had a couple years ago. We went to Zion National Park, and we had this afternoon that was almost magical. We ended up in the Kilab Wilderness, up at the far end of the park, on this little trail by a small stream. This was in the fall, and it was this beautiful fall afternoon. The fall colors all around us, this little tiny stream going along, and as we were looking at this stream, I began to notice that the little bubbles, I don't know if this video is going to work for me or not. There it goes. The bubbles were making these little stars of light on the bottom. See the little stars dancing around? And that pretty little leaf comes in. And that just kind of captures what that afternoon was like for us. Just this beautiful little stream, the little stars of light, the fall colors all around. Now, I framed that picture for sure. Because when you walk by that stream, you could have just missed what was going on there. It didn't grab your attention right away, and I wanted people to see that. I also did a little bit of editing. Because truth be told, we kind of dropped that leaf into the stream. Now, I didn't make that leaf up. We were surrounded by those leaves. They are everywhere. But I wanted to be sure that that detail that captured the fact that it was a beautiful fall day, I wanted that in the picture with everything else. And so what we see John doing is we see him at times pull things into his frame and say, I want you to see this, to understand who Jesus really is. Calvin Coolidge. Calvin Coolidge is probably one of my favorite presidents. He was Warren Harding's vice president, became the 30th president when Harding died unexpectedly in 1923. He won re-election in 1925, and when he was sworn in, the Bible he was sworn in on, he had it open to John chapter 1. So let's go to John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. You just have to let your mind wander in some of these images that John sets before us. It's like looking at great photography. It captures more than just simple documentation. It is conveying something deeper. It gives us an opportunity to, in a very real sense, look through the eyes of someone else. If you want to know how Ross saw the world as a photographer, just look at his photograph, and you are actually looking through his eyes at what he saw. John wants us to look through his eyes to see who he saw Jesus to be. And he begins by giving what may sound trite, but really it's a nickname that he gives to Jesus. George Bush was well known for giving nicknames to his friends. He called Vladimir Putin ostrich legs. Silvio Berlusconi, who was the prime minister of Italy, he called him shoes because he loved fine Italian shoes. He called Karen Hughes, his special advisor, Hurricane Karen. You can guess what that meant about her. His director of budget was named Blade, and his director of national energy policy he called Lightbulb. So you can tell something about either what a person does or what their character is sometimes by the nickname that they're given. John begins with a nickname, we might say. He says Jesus is the Word. In Greek, the Logos. Why does he call him the Word? If you listen to the language there, in the beginning was the Word, you should hear the echoes of John chapter 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Three things should jump out at you in this verse. The first is that it begins with God. In the beginning, God. God did not have a beginning. God was there in the beginning already, the eternal God. Second thing I want you to see is that God said. In other words, creation happened by a divine word. It wasn't God built. It wasn't God started gluing together. God started working really. No, God said. And the first thing that God said was, "Let there be light," and there was light. Light broke into darkness. Psalm 33, verse 6 says that by the word of the Lord the heavens were made, and by the breath of his mouth all of their host. You see what John is doing? John has the audacity to suggest that the sovereign, causative power of the eternal God that simply spoke creation into existence was none other than Jesus Christ himself. Jesus Christ is God. Jesus Christ is God's power. Note he doesn't say that God was the Word, because that would limit the scope of God. He's emphatic, though, that the Word was God. See, the Word is God, but the Word is not the Father. R.V. Tasker says, "The Word does not by himself make up the entire Godhead. Nevertheless, the divinity that belongs to the rest of the Godhead belongs also to him." You'll find sometimes among cults, the Jehovah's Witnesses say that, Jesus was merely aligned with God's divine purposes. Or within Mormonism, they claim that Jesus is just one of many gods who had attained to his godhood because of his good deeds, and that we could aspire to become the same. And some of those ideas come from the fact that in the Greek, where it says that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, there is no article the before the word God. And they say, well, in Greek, if you say that, it means it's just united in purpose, not that it's identifying him as God. However, the article there is not always required. And actually, the way John constructs his sentence places the emphasis on the fact that the Word is God. Jesus is the Word is God. The New English Bible translates it this way. And what God was, the Word was. Paul makes a similar argument in Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 through 17. He says, he is the image, speaking of Jesus, of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation, for by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Paul agrees with John. He says that Jesus Christ embodies all of God's creative power. He says Jesus Christ is enthroned above creation. He is enmeshed in the identity of the Creator himself. And he says he is the enunciator of the Creator's mind. He is the one who makes him known. John 1:4, in him was life, and the life was the light of men. John loves these concepts. The word life appears 64 times in the Gospel of John. The word light appears 27 times. While Jesus, as the Logos of God, captures John's imagination, what he's most focused on is the power of life that is wielded by this pre-existent Word. And he keeps tying these two things together. Just as in the act of creation, God came into a place where there was chaos and darkness. John sees the human soul being in that condition as well, left to itself, with chaos and darkness. And yet John has watched over a lifetime. And what he has seen again and again is this mysterious experience of Christ's life entering into someone and bringing a new creation, bringing light and life. One of the movies that has been a family favorite of us has been the old Anne of Green Gables. If you've seen that movie, maybe you know that Mrs. Harris is one of the characters. She's a very wealthy widow who has lost her husband, and since that time has been wallowing in her grief. She's put herself into a house, into a room where she's pulled all the curtains. It's always dark in there, and it's a place of just darkness and mourning and sadness. And she's a bitter, angry woman who sits there by herself in the room, making others wait on her. And when Anne shows up, Anne quickly sees that this heart has become lost in this darkness. And Anne one day boldly goes over, grabs the drapes, and throws them open and lets light flood into the room. John would say that's what Jesus does. Jesus steps into dark places where we are wallowing on our own self-pity, wallowing on our own sin. And he says he is the light, he is the life, he is the one that can throw the drapes open to let the true light in. You know, if you want to get a sense of John's heart, I take you to 1 John chapter 1. He says, that which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we looked upon and have touched with our hands concerning the word of life. The life was made manifest, and we've seen it and testified to it and proclaimed to you the eternal life, which was with the Father and was made manifest to us. You see how John is still getting these same themes? He's still talking about the word and the light and the life, but he says, I saw it. I touched him. I was in contact with this one that I'm writing about, and he has changed my life forever. Of the many gifted teachers and the beautiful life philosophies, John would say there is one teacher in particular that rises above them all because he is unique above them all. You know, among these pictures, one of these is very unique. And it's this one right here, because this photo was actually taken by Ansel Adams. Now, for those of you that aren't in the world of photography, that may not mean much, but Ansel Adams is a legendary American photographer who did his work primarily in black and white. So this is an Ansel Adams print. But this is more than just an Ansel Adams print. If you were to look really close down here very faintly, you would see that this is a signed Ansel Adams print. But this actually is even more than a signed Ansel Adams print. This is a signed Ansel Adams contact print. Now, for non-photographers, you may not appreciate this, but a contact print is very unique. It's something we don't really get in the digital age anymore. But what happens with a contact print, you have the negative that's in the camera that takes the picture. And normally, when you develop that into a print, you put that into a machine that projects light through it onto the photographic paper. You blow that up to whatever size you want, and that paper then is exposed, and you develop it and get the photograph. With a contact print, you take the physical negative and you lay it directly in contact with the photographic paper, and that's how you develop it. It is a one-to-one reproduction of the original negative. It's considered the best print that you can get. Now, some of you are looking at the size of this thing and thinking, well, my goodness, film is like this big. How do you picture that size? Well, Ansel had this idea. He loved to shoot in large format photography, so he shot using an 8x10 camera. Every sheet of film was 8 inches by 10 inches, which is like every picture you shoot was a full roll of 36 exposures of 35 millimeter film. So this big negative got placed directly on the paper by Ansel Adams. The print was made, and he signed it. That is a contact print. In a sense, that's what John is saying about Jesus. John chapter 1, verse 8. Oh yeah, Ansel said you don't take a photograph, you make one. The Creator. No one has ever seen God, the only God who is at the Father's side. He has made him known. John says the unseen God. If you ever look at a negative, if you're not an experienced photographer, looking at a negative is very difficult. It makes no sense. You can't appreciate what's going on there. It has to come into contact with a medium that you can understand. John says, in a sense, what Jesus is he is God's contact print. He is the exact representation of who God is. God in contact with humanity. Now, every illustration breaks down. This one certainly breaks down because John isn't saying that Jesus is just a picture of God. Okay, film was just the medium that Ansel Adams worked with. He says, no, this goes beyond that. This is like if Ansel Adams himself had printed himself on the paper. The Word was God. And he has come in contact with us, and now the invisible God, he has made him visible so that we can see and understand who God is. John says, I have seen the contact print. I've seen him, I've touched him, I've talked to him. And just as he was far more than just a man, what he brings is far more than just a technique for living. He says he is life. So what versus so who? My bend is always toward the so what. The what do we do now? I'm pretty practical in how I think about life. And if you go to a bookstore, you will see that there are self-help books galore. Do-it-yourself guides and how to fix it lives and how to hack life. But John slows us down before we start thinking about the so whats. He says there's a more fundamental question, and that is the so who. The reason I've got this picture today is because this is actually Ross Hamilton's, and he was so kind as to loan this to me. And actually, it turns out Ross, as a young man, worked for Ansel Adams in his studio. Now, I have a hunch that if we were to interview Ross about this, he would say that what impacted his photography even more than the so what Ansel produced, it was the so who. It was the fact that he worked with Ansel. He got to learn from him and know him. So, who is Jesus in our life? Is he just something that we look at for some inspiration? Or are we really seeking him? Seeking relationship with him? Is he additive or is he preeminent? Is he just another helpful voice in a chorus of counselors that we listen to and we pick and choose what seems best to us? Or is his voice the one that I listen to above all others? That it is his call that my life orbits around. You know, John warns us that it is possible to miss it. It's possible to have magnificence right in front of us and miss it. When you look at photographs like these, I guarantee you there were lots and lots of people that walked by these very same scenes and never saw them. They were too distracted to see the beauty that was right there in front of them. John says that he was in the world. He was right here in the world, and the world was made through him, and yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. John's goal is to draw our attention to the truly unique one among many, to help us see the magnificent one who came among us, that we wouldn't miss it. And I think one of the questions I have to ask is, who does my life revolve around? If my life revolves around me, if the so who that matters most is me, then the only so whats that matter in my life are going to be the so whats that are self-serving. What does it get me? What gets me ahead? What gets me what I want? Sometimes we don't revolve life completely around us. We revolve our lives around other people. But if I revolve my life around just another person, I am setting myself on an erratic course. I will set myself up for demands that are greater than I can give. And I'm trying to center myself on something that may fail or abandon me and over which I have no control. If my life is orbiting around the wrong center. But what if my life revolves around the very author of life? John says they missed it. He was in the world, and the world was made through him. The creator of the world was right there. And they missed it. They were too busy, too consumed, too concerned about other things that seem more important. And they missed the one that really was the center. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Isn't that amazing? God gives us the right, the privilege to step into a relationship with the creator of the universe, to be his children. The question, so what, is the stuff that resumes are made of. The question is, what are you, Mr. Applicant, going to do for me? And I will evaluate you based on whether or not you will do more for me than the other resume over here will do. So what can you do for me? But so who is what relationships are made of? Who are you really? Do I want to entwine my life with yours? You know, I did not marry a resume. Burnett is a great cook, but I didn't primarily marry her for her cooking. She is a wonderful tennis player, but I didn't fall in love with her serve. She is a gifted musician, but I didn't buy her a ring so she could keep me on pitch. What I am is I'm in love with who she is. And yes, the things that she does, those are part of the package, but there is something deeper that draws me to her. And what Jesus calls us into, and what John would remind us of first and foremost, is that Jesus calls us into a relationship. That we would love a who, not just what he can do for us. He is the author of life itself. He is the one who invites us into the life that he created for us to live. I talked about Calvin Coolidge earlier. Calvin Coolidge has one of my favorite quotes. Nothing in this world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful men with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. The slogan, "Press on," has solved and always will solve the problems of the human race. When I was running a business, I had that over my desk. It was a good reminder that sometimes it is just staying with the task. I love that quote, except for the part that isn't true. You see, persistence and determination will take you a lot of places, but it won't get you into heaven. John says, to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Not those who had worked hard enough for it, not those who were persistent enough to have earned it, but those who had simply believed in his name, who received him. We receive, we believe, we become children of God. Well, what good is that? So what if the answer to "so who" is Jesus? Does that really matter? He says, well, from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. You see, the law is all about persistence and hard work. And if that's how we get to heaven, John would remind us that's not going to get you there, because we all fail. But he says what Jesus brought was he brought grace and truth. If you're not a follower of Jesus, what you're being invited to is not to adopt more rules. You're being invited to embrace a grace-filled invitation to join God's family. If you're a follower of Jesus, maybe your focus has gotten distracted. Maybe your failures have gotten you defeated. John would ask you to refocus your eyes on Jesus, to quiet your heart in the beauty of his grace. For from his fullness, we all have received grace upon grace. So who matters far more than so what. Amen.